So when you guys open your slideshow, let's get to the slideshow, like I said. So today we're going to talk about Spanish explorers, And there's a couple different reasons why these Spanish explorers were sailing from Spain and going to the New World. So one of the Spanish explorers were one of the first explorers to sail across the Atlantic Ocean. And we'll cover who some of those explorers were. And so these
My aunt is from Spain.
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah.
These Spanish explorers, they were kind of the first ones to kind of help lead this journey to discover what was out there around the world. So they were the kind of the first ones to leave and sail across this ocean and kind of discover this land and figure out where they are around the world. So there was a couple of different reasons why they began to travel. So they began to sail across the world because one, either they wanted to find a faster or a more efficient trade route. And then two, they heard about there was gold in the New World, so they maybe wanted to try to find gold. And then three, they were sailing because they wanted to be one of the first ones to claim new land. So they wanted to find new land and claim it for Spain. So there was a couple different reasons why some people wanted to travel. So let's get into some of the explorers. All right, let's get into a map first. So let's just figure out where we are. So Spain, this is where our Spanish explorers come from. So Spain is located almost right in the middle of the map here. And it's almost this yellowish land right here. And so all of these explorers were leaving from Spain and sailed for the country of Spain. So mainly they left Spain and sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and landed mainly here in Central America. So they would sail across the Atlantic Ocean and land in the islands of Central America or near Florida here or along South America as well. So they were the ones that kind of first discovered the Americas and discovered this land around here, okay? And so were leaving from Spain to sail across the Atlantic Ocean and mainly travel to the Americas. And we covered Portugal on Tuesday, so Spain is right next to Portugal there. And then here's another little map to just kind of show you the exploration of all these explorers during this time. So Spain on this map, if we look at our key, Spain is found by the purple arrows. So a lot of the purple arrows are leaving from Spain and they're venturing off, basically coming mainly here towards the islands of Central America. And you see they come to the United States and in South America as well. So they spend a lot of time mainly going through across the Atlantic Ocean and coming to Central America here, okay? So now let's get to our 8 explorers. So like I said, with each 8 explorer, with your show it, the matching portions of the show it are gonna be highlighted in yellow. So look for the highlighted statement for each explorer, and that's gonna be the statement that you gotta match on your show it, okay? So the slideshow is gonna be helpful with finding those matching points. So Christopher Columbus, who was he? You probably have heard a lot about Christopher Columbus because a lot of our cities and areas are named after Christopher Columbus, being our capital city of Ohio is named after Christopher Columbus. So let's figure out who he is. So he was born in Italy and worked as a seaman as an early age. So he was actually born in Italy, so not in Spain. And he spent most of his time at a young age working around boats and around water. So he was spending a lot of time living on boats and sailing on boats throughout the Mediterranean Sea. And that's where he kind of learned how to navigate and sail different types of boats and ships. And he began his career as a Portuguese merchant marine and married a Portuguese woman. So he was actually important because this is actually an important statement because he spent a lot of time of his life in Portugal. So Portugal actually could have been the country that Christopher Columbus sailed for, but unfortunately they didn't provide him the money and supplies that they needed. So he went to another country to find those efforts. So Columbus tried to get financial backing from the King of Portugal. So he went to the King of Portugal and tried to convince him to give him money and supplies and the ships that he needed to sail across the Atlantic Ocean for an expedition to sail west. So Christopher Columbus, actually, his reason for sailing across the Atlantic Ocean, he wanted to find a trade route that connected Portugal and Spain to Asia and the Indies. So if we go back to our map here, Christopher Columbus wanted to find the easiest way, or find a sailing path to get from Portugal and Spain and to get all the way to Asia and the Indies over here. So there was a bunch of spices and silks and other goods that Christopher Columbus wanted to get and trade with. So he wanted to sail here and find the easiest way to sail across. So he actually left from Spain, and we'll talk about here in a second. He left from Spain and landed in the Caribbean islands. And he thought that when he landed on the Caribbean islands, he thought that he was actually in Indonesia and in the Indies. So he thought he made his trip, and he thought that throughout his entire life. So he went.
Is Indonesia,
yeah.
Bahamas?
So the Bahamas, if we look back at the map, the Bahamas are actually in the Caribbean. The Bahamas are here, and then the Indies are over. Indonesia is all the way over here. Okay, good question. So with Columbus, after he was denied by Portugal, he went to Spain and asked the Spanish monarchs to sponsor him and give him money and give him ships. And he had to wait 7 years before he was finally approved. So he had to be extremely patient, because it took 7 years for the Spanish monarchs to finally approve Columbus to give him the necessary resources he needed to sail across the Atlantic Ocean. So he was given 3 ships. He was given a fleet of 3 ships to sail west. And those 3 ships' names are the Pinta, the Nina, and the Santa Maria. And so those are very important ships. And some of these, a couple of these ships are actually still around today. And you can see them they're in port along the Atlantic Ocean, and visit these ships and see kind of how their life was living on these ships. And so the fleet of 3 ships left Palos, Spain on August 3rd, 1492, and sailed westward, and they landed on the Bahamas Islands on October 12th. So it took them about 2 months to sail across the Atlantic Ocean, and that's where they discovered the Americas. So they were one of the first ones to discover the Americas in this new world. But they didn't know that they did. They didn't know that they discovered the Americas. Like I said, they thought that they landed in Indonesia, and they thought they were there in Indonesia and able to make trades now. So throughout Christopher Columbus's entire life, he thought he landed on Indonesia and was able to connect this path between Spain and Indonesia. But in fact, they actually landed in the Caribbean and in the Americas. So they were actually the first ones to discover the Americas and this new world. And remember, with the show it, this statement right here, it's highlighted. So this is going to be the statement that matches up with Christopher Columbus on the show it. So look at your show it, and that'll be matching up there. And so after a few months of living in the Bahama Islands, Christopher Columbus, he returned back to Spain, and he left all of his supplies and people and crew in the Bahamas, and they created this new settlement. They created this city called Navidad. And so the city of Navidad was built by Christopher Columbus's crew, and he promised to return after a few months. Well, it turned out to be longer than a few months that Christopher Columbus was gone. So Christopher Columbus went on a second trip that included 17 ships. So this time he was returning back to Navidad with 17 ships and 1,200 more men in September 1493. So almost a year to 2 years later, Columbus finally returns to Navidad. So when he returns to Navidad, he finds it completely destroyed. Nobody's living there. It's all burned down. It's all destroyed. And they were mainly destroyed by the natives, the Native Americans that were living there. So the natives destroyed the city of Navidad and ruined Christopher Columbus's dream of building this establishment, because he didn't return in time because they ran out of supplies. So the people that were living in Navidad, they were becoming more annoying and pesterouous to the natives. So the natives finally wiped them out and destroyed their settlement. And so Columbus would actually make a few more trips back and forth between Spain and the New World before he finally wrecked his ship in 1503. And he had to actually wait a year before he was rescued and returned to Spain. So when he wrecked his ship, he couldn't just use his cell phone and call over to the Spanish monarchs and say, hey, I wrecked, you need to come get me. He had to, communication back then was very hard to get across the Atlantic Ocean and very hard to communicate with each other. So it took many, many months to get a letter to the Spanish monarchs that said Christopher Columbus had crashed and he needed to be rescued. And then finally, a year later, he was rescued and they returned him back to Spain, where he would live out the rest of his life. So that is a little bit about Christopher Columbus and his journey in exploring and conquering the New World. Then our second explorer is Vasco Nunez de Bulba. Vasco Nunez de Bulba. And so he was a Spanish conquistador and explorer. And in 1500, Bulba explored the coast of present-day Colombia and then settled in Hispaniola. So Hispaniola is going to be important for a lot of our explorers. So Hispaniola is this island here in the Caribbean and is actually made up of two countries today. So you have the country of Haiti and the country of the Dominican Republic are located on Hispaniola. And so this is where Bulba first makes landfall. So he kind of settles here in Hispaniola, and then he begins to journey out and discover more land throughout the Caribbean. So he started his own town of Santa Maria de la Antigua on the Isthmus of Panama. So eventually he gets to Panama down here, and this isthmus here, so an isthmus is a narrow strip of land that connects two bigger pieces of land. So you have South America and Central America are connected through Panama here, this isthmus, this narrow strip of land. And so Bulba settles there and starts this city, and he names himself the governor of this community. So the governor, meaning he had the highest power and the most power of this city, and he named himself the governor. So he was controlled this city in Panama. And in 1513, he became actually the first European to see the Pacific Ocean and claimed the South Sea and adjacent lands for Spain. So if you look at the map here, on Panama, it's on each border of Panama, you have the Atlantic Ocean and then the Pacific Ocean. So Bulba was actually the first European to put his eyes on the Atlantic Ocean or Pacific Ocean. So he was the first European to see the Pacific Ocean, and he claimed all of this land for Spain. So his goal mainly was to conquer a lot of this land and claim it for Spain. So all of this area would be under control for Spain. And so he would actually continue to become governors of these cities. So as he claimed more and more land, he would build more and more of these cities. And that became very dangerous because people thought that he was becoming very power hungry and he needed all of this power and all this control. And since he was governor of all these cities, he had control of a lot of the area in the region. And so people feared one person having all of this power. And so his rival, Pedreras, seized Bulba. So they captured him and arrested him, and because they feared his influence that he had. And they charged Bulba with rebellion, treason, and other charges. So he was sent to a Spanish court. And then after an unfair trial, so the trial was not fair to Bulba, he was found guilty and they killed him. So they cut off his head because they were worried about his power that he would have. So they worried that he would conquer all of this land throughout Central America. So they, instead of letting him continue to conquer more and more land, they decided to behead him and they cut his head off to control his power. So his siege came to an end finally when he was beheaded by his rival to keep him from growing in power. So that's Francisco Nunez de Bulba. So main thing, he was the first one to see the Pacific Ocean. Then we get to our third explorer, which is Ferdinand Magellan. And he's another very important Spanish explorer because he accomplished many great things. And there's a lot of things that are named after him. And so he came from a wealthy Portuguese family and was well educated. So what's important to that is, like we said on Tuesday, a lot of these explorers, they come from a wealthy family because they need a lot of money to build these ships and have the supplies that they need. And he was actually very well educated too. So you need to be smart in order to know where you're going and how to navigate these different ships. Yes, Paige.
What was the name of the person who we were just?
Vasco Nunez de Bulba.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And so Magellan
How do
in
you see that?
What'd you say?
I said, how do you even say his name?
Ferdinand Magellan?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how you say it. So Magellan is how you say it.
Oh.
So Ferdinand Magellan, in 1513, Magellan sought permission from King Manuel of Portugal to sail west. So he was another explorer that went to Portugal to first kind of see if they would offer up services and supplies that they needed to sail west. But the King of Portugal refused. And so Ferdinand Magellan had to go to a different country. So he went to Spain and offered up his services to the Spanish court. And then eventually King Charles V of Spain gave his approval and Magellan left on his expedition. So Magellan was given the supplies that he needed by Spain. And so Spain then is who Magellan sailed under. So he sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and arrived at Brazil, where he continued to sail around the South American coast. And as he sailed around more and more south, he discovered the Strait of Magellan. So if we go back to our map here, back to the map at the beginning, so Magellan started in Spain and then sailed down to Brazil here. And then he continued along the coast of South America before finally getting down to the very bottom of South America, where he finds this Strait of Magellan. And so what a strait is a narrow strip of water that connects two bigger bodies of water. So this narrow strip of water here, where these red arrows are pointing, this narrow strip of water, it connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, and all this land here is the very bottom of South America. So this Strait of Magellan was almost like a shortcut through South America to get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And Magellan was the first one to find this strait. And so they named this strait after him. And then when he reached the Pacific Ocean, Magellan actually named the Pacific Ocean. So he's the one that gives us the name Pacific Ocean, because it means the peaceful sea. So the peaceful sea is the translation for the Pacific Ocean. So the name Pacific Ocean was actually given or named by Ferdinand Magellan. So he named the Pacific Ocean here. And as he continued to sail around South America, he continued to sail throughout the Pacific Ocean. Yes, Kayla?
But why was it named Pacific Ocean if it was just peace?
So when he was looking at the sea, when he first encountered the sea, he saw that it was very peaceful. Like there wasn't a lot of high waves. It was very calm waters, very easy traveling. So that's why he named it a peaceful sea.
Oh.
So as he continued to sail throughout the Pacific Ocean, he eventually made it to the Philippines. And in the Philippines, he encountered this battle, this war, as he tried to conquer this land. So he was caught in this war, and in the war, he was actually killed in the war, in the battle to try to conquer the land of Philippines. So he was killed, and his crew decided to keep on sailing. So his crew decided to keep on sailing throughout the Pacific and then into the Indian Ocean. And then they traveled around the Cape of Good Hope from the east. And then they finally actually made it back to Spain. So they were actually, if you look on this map here, they started off by sailing down into the Atlantic Ocean, sailing along South America. And then they went through the Strait of Magellan and then into the Pacific Ocean, where it continues on the other side. And then they made it to the Philippines. And this is where Magellan was killed. And then he sailed through the Philippines, through the Indian Ocean, around Africa, back up Africa, and then up into Spain. And so Magellan's crew became the first to circumnavigate the planet, which irrefutably proved that the Earth was round and showed the vastness of the oceans compared to the land. So Magellan's crew was the first one to travel around the entire world. They were the first one to travel around the entire Earth. And this is very important because it proved that the oceans were a lot bigger than the land. So there was much more ocean water than there was land. And it also proved that the Earth was round. So in the 1500s, the previous thought was the Earth was flat, and then they would eventually reach the end of the Earth where they would just fall off. So as they were sailing, they thought that they would eventually encounter the edge or the end of the Earth and they would fall off the Earth, but that never happened. So they actually made it throughout the entire world and made it back to Spain. And so that proved that the Earth was round because they made it a full circle. They made the whole trip around the world. So they were the first crew first people to make and sail around the entire world. And so that's the big importance from Ferdinand Magellan. And then our next, our fourth explorer is Hernan Cortez. And we covered, this name should be familiar because when we covered the Aztecs, we talked about who conquered the Aztecs, and that was Hernan Cortez. So Hernan Cortez, he was a Spanish conquistador who went to Hispaniola in 1504. So he actually went to the islands in the Caribbean in 1504 and then began to explore the different land around Hispaniola. So he went to Mexico as well. And Cortez actually began a march to Tenochtitlan. So he actually began to march on the capital city of the Aztecs, Tenochtitlan, and this would lead to a battle. So a war that lasted many, many months as the Spanish tried to capture the city of Tenochtitlan because it was a very important city. And then finally the city would fall to the Spaniards, led by Cortez because of their superior weapons and their superior armor that they had. And then on October 15th, 1522, the Emperor Charles V appointed Cortez governor and captain of New Spain, and the name of the newly conquered region. So since Cortez captured this area and captured this city, they had to give it a new name. And so what they decided to do, they thought long and hard, and they just thought, oh, since we're sailing for Spain, we'll just call this land New Spain because it's a new area. So they called this area New Spain after they conquered it. And Cortez was named the governor and captain of New Spain. And so he was given power and control over it. And then he helped rebuild Tenochtitlan into a Spanish city of Mexico and subdued all of the other native tribes away. So he helped rebuild Tenochtitlan. And then that's why Tenochtitlan is still an important city today, as it is Mexico City. And so you can still see some of the influence of Cortez and the Aztecs within the city of Mexico City today. Alrighty, so that is a little bit about Hernan Cortez. And then our fifth explorer.
Does Mexico still have?
Yeah, Kale.
Does Mexico still have the some of the buildings they built?
Yeah. So yep, Mexico City still has some of the buildings that Cortez built. Yep. So you can actually go visit some of them still today.
Okay.
And then our fifth explorer is Juan Ponce de Leon. So Juan Ponce de Leon, and he's pretty unique. So the reason why he wanted to sail is because he thought that by sailing and conquering this new land, he wanted to be famous. So he wanted fame and fortune as a soldier. So he wanted to be known as being this great explorer and finding all of this gold and wealth. So he was on a journey to become famous and discover all of this gold that was supposedly in the New World. So he actually migrated and sailed to Hispaniola, where the natives in Hispaniola told him about this story of this island being covered in gold. So they kept kind of telling him this story. And then the natives knew that it wasn't true, but they kept telling Ponce de Leon this story because they knew they wanted to try to get rid of him. So this is kind of the way to get rid of him and make him leave off this island. And so they told him that this island was covered in gold. And this neighboring island was Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico was the neighboring island they were talking about. And so there was many islands that were around that these natives told him that were covered in gold. And they even told him about, Paige, you're correct. So they even told him about El Dorado. So El Dorado is a city that the natives often talked about that was just completely covered in gold. And Ponce de Leon was trying to find this city as well. But in this case, he was trying to find this island. So it took him 4 years before he finally crossed over and conquered the island of Puerto Rico. But he was disappointed because he searched the entire island and was never able to find any of the gold. So he was actually governor of Puerto Rico until the king removed him of office in 1512. And then he continued to want to search for that gold and continue to find these different stories that these natives were telling him. So eventually he obtained permission to discover and settle the island of Bimini, which is in the Bahamas and near Puerto Rico. And so this island was supposed to be a rich island that was northwest of Puerto Rico. And he was told that there was this fountain of youth on this island. So he went looking for this fountain of youth, which was a mythical spring that prevented aging that was told to be on the island. So the fountain of youth was said to be on this island. And the story goes that if you drink the water from the fountain of youth, then you would live forever and be young forever. So Ponce de Leon wanted to find this fountain of youth and live forever and become famous by living forever. So he was on a very hard quest to find this fountain of youth. And so that he spent a lot of his life looking for this fountain of youth. So yes, he was very gullible in the fact that he believed basically anything that people told him. So in 1514, Ponce de Leon, since he didn't find the fountain of youth, he returned back to Spain and then tried to get permission to colonize Florida. And so he wanted to conquer Florida next. And Florida was a very important area of land that the Spanish wanted to conquer because of its position and the way that it was shaped. So it was a peninsula and it's located near a lot of the body of water. And so Florida became a high priority for the Spanish to conquer. But the Native Americans that were living on Florida protected Florida very well. So they did a good job at protecting Florida and protecting their land. So Ponce de Leon led this attack on Florida to try to colonize it, but he was killed by the natives in a battle as he was trying to conquer Florida. So the natives did a really good job at protecting their land away from the Spanish. And then our sixth explorer is Hernando de Soto. So Hernando de Soto, he was a Spanish explorer and conquistador who explored Florida and southeastern North America. So he sailed to the Caribbean, and then he explored and tried to spend a lot of time wandering through Florida and the southeastern portion of the United States. And so he was actually pretty famous for first exploring all of this land and seeing the different land features that were on North America. And he played a big role in actually slave trading along the Isthmus of Panama. So he was one of the first to bring this idea of slaves to the New World. And we'll see how that impacts future Americas as they are going along. So he was one of the first ones to bring that ideas of slaves to North America. And the Spanish actually commissioned him, gave him money to conquer Florida. They wanted him to conquer Florida, but he never succeeded. So he never succeeded in his journey to conquer Florida. So the Spanish were trying to pay these explorers to see who could be the one to conquer Florida, because it was a very valuable piece of land, but they were never able to during this time. And then our next explorer is Francisco Vasquez de Coronado. So a long name. So he was a
Are these actual pictures of the people?
They're like paintings of what they could have looked like, yeah. So Francisco Vasquez de Coronado, he was a Spanish explorer of the North American Southwest. So he was actually exploring the Southwest region of the United States. So near the states of Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And he is another one that's kind of gullible, because he was a leader of this expedition where he was trying to find the 7 cities of gold. And they were told that these cities were paved with streets and houses were made with gold. So everything was made of gold. And so he was on this journey to find these 7 cities of gold. So he was going to do everything to look for these cities of gold. And so he would conquer these small tribes of Native Americans throughout the Southwest, but he was never able to find any city of gold, which left him very disappointed and very frustrated. So as he would conquer these tribes, he would take over their tribes and dig around and try to find all this gold, but he never really found any of the gold, which left him disappointed. So that was his main journey, is he tried to find all of this gold, but was never able to find the 7 cities of gold. And then our last explorer is Juan de Onate. So Juan de Onate, he was a noble Spaniard born in the New World. So he's pretty unique because he was actually born here in the New World. So he wasn't born in Spain. He was born here in the New World. And he spent most of his life looking for silver and leading campaigns against native tribes. So he wanted to find fortune. So he wanted that silver to become wealthy. And he also spread his religion. So as he was conquering these tribes, he wanted to spread the Christianity religion to all of these Native Americans. So he was trying to spread Christianity throughout the entire New World and making that the only religion that they should worship, okay? And in 1598, Onate established the headquarters of New Mexico. So he actually established this town or this territory of New Mexico. and he held a festival and Thanksgiving for a safe passage across the Rio Grande River. So he discovered the area of New Mexico, and the reason why he named it New Mexico is because he was from Mexico area, and so when he discovered this new land, he decided to give it the name New Mexico to name it after his homeland. But after many times more and more traveling, as they began to travel more and more north into North America, they started to run out of food. They weren't finding any silver, and they were having more troubles with the Native Americans. So that forced them back into Mexico because they needed to find food and get away from these Native Americans. And then again, like another explorer, because he was power hungry, he was actually fined, and he wanted to continue to push further and further and take these people further and further north, but they didn't have the resources to. So he wanted to continue to do that, and these people didn't believe him. So he was actually banished from New Mexico permanently because they knew that he would just continue to try to push his power and push his luck. And he was banished from Mexico City as well. And so he was forced to return back to Spain. So his main accomplishment was kind of finding this area and establishing this area of New Mexico and claiming it for Spain. All right. So that's a little bit about our 8 Spanish explorers. So now you guys can go into your Buzz page, and in the Buzz page, you're going to use the slideshow to help you with the Show It. So all these statements here, when you're matching, all of these statements are highlighted in the Show It or highlighted in the slideshow, and that'll help you match it up with the correct explorer. And then you have the extended response question that you need to answer too at the bottom there. So pick which one of the explorers you thought was the most successful, and why do you think that? Okay.